All right, so picture this. It was a Tuesday, glorious, sunshine, not a cloud in the sky, absolutely perfect golfing weather, right? Except it was anything but perfect. In fact, it was probably the most infuriating, hilarious, and utterly bonkers round of golf any of us had ever attempted. And trust me, we've had some doozies over the years. This wasn't just any golf game, though. This was the Greenkeeper Revenge Golf Challenge, and let me tell you, those guys, Mark and Dave, the masterminds behind the course maintenance, they do not mess around when it comes to sweet, sweet payback. You see, a few months back, we, meaning me, Liam, Chloe, and Sam, we pulled off what we thought was the ultimate prank. We replaced all the flags on the back nine with miniature pirate flags, complete with tiny skull and crossbones. We even swapped out a few of the sand rakes for those little plastic shovels you use at the beach. It was harmless, we thought, just a bit of fun. They'd find it amusing. Well, they did not. Not even a little bit. Mark, with his perpetually squinting eyes and a permanent tan line from his cap, he just gave us that slow, deliberate look. The one that tells you you've crossed a line. And Dave, usually the more jovial of the two, he just muttered something about us having a surprise coming. We laughed it off then, thinking nothing of it. Oh, how naive we were. Fast forward to today. We'd booked a tee time at our usual course, the one we practically grew up on. Liam, ever the optimist, was already bragging about his swing. Chloe, meticulously cleaning her clubs, was giving us her usual pre-game lecture about course etiquette. And Sam, well, Sam was just trying to finish his ridiculously oversized breakfast burrito before we even hit the first tee. I was just soaking it all in, feeling that familiar pre-game buzz, completely oblivious to the impending chaos. We pulled up to the first tee box, a beautiful par 4, dogleg left, usually a pretty straightforward opening hole. The sun was glinting off the dew-kissed grass, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree near the green. Everything looked normal. Too normal, actually. A little voice in the back of my head, probably the one that remembers Mark's ominous stare, started whispering, "This is too calm. This is the calm before the storm." We teed up. Liam, always first, took a practice swing, looking confident. He addressed the ball, focused, and then, calm, balmy, calm. Calm. A perfect drive, a slight draw, soaring high and true towards the bend in the fairway. We watched it land, a tiny white speck against the lush green. But then, something odd happened. The ball didn't roll. It just stopped. And then, it started to slowly, almost majestically, float. My jaw dropped. Liam's eyes went wide. Chloe gasped. Sam, who had finally finished his burrito, choked on a gulp of coffee. What in the actual world? We sprinted down the fairway, not even bothering with the cart, just pure adrenaline pumping. And there it was. Our golf ball, Liam's perfectly struck golf ball, was resting on the surface of what appeared to be a giant, inflatable bounce house. Yes, a bounce house. A bright, primary-colored child's party bounce house, stretched across the entire width of the fairway, right where a normal drive would land. And it was slightly deflated, making the ball slowly sink into a soft, bouncy valley. Mark and Dave emerged from behind a large bush, wearing identical mischievous grins, holding walkie-talkies. Mark just held up a hand, a silent challenge. Dave just cackled. This was it. The Greenkeeper revenge had officially begun. Liam stood there, club still in hand, looking from his ball to the bounce house, then to Mark and Dave, then back to his ball. He looked utterly bewildered. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so perfectly absurd. Chloe, ever the stickler for rules, immediately started protesting. "This isn't regulation. You can't just put a bounce house in the middle of a golf course." Mark just shrugged, his grin widening. He simply said, "The course is playing as it lies, folks. Standard rules apply. We just made a few enhancements." Sam, bless his competitive heart, immediately started strategizing. Okay, so how do we play it? Do we hit it off the bounce house? Do we take a drop?" Mark just shook his head. no drops. You play it as it lies. Unless, of course, you want to concede the hole and take a triple bogey. The threat was clear. We had to conquer the bounce house. Liam, still reeling, decided to try and hit it off the bouncy surface. He carefully approached his ball, which was now nestled in a soft, undulating dip. He took a tentative stance, trying to find some stable footing on the squishy plastic. He swung, a delicate chip, hoping to just pop it over the obstacle. But the club head sank into the inflatable. The ball barely moved, and Liam nearly lost his balance, flailing his arms like a windmill. The ball just rolled a few inches, still on the bounce house. Mark and Dave were practically rolling on the grass with laughter. My turn. I decided a different approach was needed. I pulled out my wedge, figuring a higher loft might work. I took a full swing, trying to generate enough power to launch the ball high into the air, over the bounce house, and hopefully towards the green. The club connected with a soft thud. The ball took off, but the bouncy surface absorbed so much of the energy that it only managed to clear the bounce house by about 3 feet, landing with a splash in a strategically placed kiddie pool on the other side. A kiddie pool, mind you, that was filled with what looked suspiciously like green-dyed water. Mark and Dave high-fived, with a new respect for the ingenuity of our unseen tormentors. Each hole was not just a challenge, but a puzzle, requiring us to rethink every fundamental principle of golf. As we walked towards the 8th tee, the sky was a canvas of fiery orange and purple. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of cut grass and something vaguely electrical. The energy of the Greenkeepers, a playful menace, seemed to hang in the twilight. The 8th hole was a par 5, a long, winding dogleg. As we approached, we noticed something unusual in the distance. A series of large, inflatable obstacles, like a giant, colorful, bouncy castle playground, had been erected along the entire length of the fairway. They were shaped like various cartoon animals in geometric forms, all brightly colored and towering over the landscape. "This is just getting silly," I muttered. Sam, however, seemed to have entered a zen-like state of acceptance. He just nodded, a weary but determined look on his face. We quickly realized these weren't just obstacles to hit over. They were time-movable obstacles. As we prepared to tee off, a low hum filled the air, and slowly, deliberately, the inflatable animals began to shift, rotating, inflating and deflating slightly, creating a constantly changing landscape. It was like playing golf in a giant slow-motion game of Tetris. We had to time our shots perfectly, aiming for gaps that would close an instant later, or trying to bounce our balls off the softer surfaces of the inflatables. My first drive, aimed at a gap between a giant, inflatable elephant and a smiling sun, sailed true, only for the elephant to slowly rotate, blocking the path and sending my ball ricocheting into a giant, inflatable mushroom. Sam, ever the strategist, decided to use the inflatables to his advantage. He aimed for the side of a large, bouncy castle wall, hoping the rebound would send his ball down the fairway. It worked, but with a little too much force, and his ball bounced wildly from one inflatable to another, like a pinball, before finally coming to rest in a small inflatable pool filled with plastic balls. We spent the next hour navigating the inflatable obstacle course, our progress slow and methodical. We were physically tired, but mentally, we were sharper than ever, constantly calculating trajectories, anticipating movements, and adapting to the ever-changing landscape. We were no longer just golfers. We were problem solvers, strategists, and slightly unhinged adventurers. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon as we approached the 9th and final hole. A faint glow still lingered in the western sky, painting the clouds in hues of deep violet and rose. The air was cool, almost chilly, and a sense of both anticipation and dread settled over us. This was it. The grand finale. The culmination of the most bizarre round of golf we had ever played. We could hear it before we saw it. A low, rhythmic whirring, accompanied by a faint, metallic clanking. As we rounded the final bend in the cart path, the scene before us was truly astounding. The ninth hole was a par 4, a relatively straightforward layout on most days. But not today. Today, the entire fairway and green had been transformed into a giant, elaborate Rube Goldberg machine. There were conveyor belts slowly moving across the fairway, giant pendulums swinging back and forth, a series of ramps and chutes, a miniature Ferris wheel slowly turning, and even a small, inflatable cannon aimed at the green. Wires and tubes snaked across the landscape, connecting various contraptions. The flagstick, our ultimate goal, was perched atop a small, rotating platform surrounded by a moat of gently bubbling water. My mouth hung open. Sam let out a long, slow breath. "They saved the best for last," he whispered, a mixture of awe and utter exhaustion in his voice. This was it. The greenkeepers had pulled out all the stops. This wasn't just a golf hole. It was a kinetic sculpture, a living, breathing testament to their twisted genius. We stood on the tee box, clubs in hand, looking at the mechanical marvel before us. There was no clear path. Every shot would have to be carefully calculated, timed to perfection. Hit too early, and the ball would be swept away by a conveyor belt. Hit too late, and it would be blocked by a swinging pendulum. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "We've come this far. We can do this." Sam nodded, his eyes scanning the complex setup. He looked like a general planning a major campaign. My first drive was a disaster. I tried to hit it over a conveyor belt, but misjudged the distance, and my ball landed squarely on the moving track, slowly but surely being carried off to the left, towards a series of spinning cogs. I watched, helpless, as it disappeared from view. Sam, however, had a different idea. He aimed for a small ramp to the right, hoping his ball would roll down it, bypass a swinging pendulum, and land near a chute. He struck the ball cleanly, and it soared through the twilight, landing perfectly on the ramp. It rolled down, narrowly missing the pendulum, and then, with a satisfying clatter, dropped into the chute, disappearing into the heart of the machine. We watched, mesmerized, as a few seconds later, his ball popped out of another chute, having been transported almost to the green. It was incredible. "I need to learn from you," I said, genuinely impressed. We spent the next hour playing the Rube Goldberg hole, each shot a nerve-wracking gamble. We had to wait for the Ferris wheel to align, for the pendulums to swing out of the way, for the conveyor belts to deliver our balls to the next stage. It was a test of patience, timing, and an almost childlike willingness to embrace the absurd. At one point, my ball landed near the edge of a small, rotating platform, precariously close to a series of tiny, whirring gears. It was a perilous position. One wrong move, one tremor from the platform, and it would tumble into the mechanical maw below. Sam advised caution, suggesting a gentle tap, just enough to nudge it past the danger zone. I took a deep breath, my putter feeling impossibly heavy. I aimed for a small, unmoving cog on the other side, hoping for a rebound that would send it towards the next stage. My shot was true, a soft kiss of metal on plastic. The ball rolled slowly, agonizingly slowly, across the rotating surface. It seemed to hang there, defying gravity for a moment, before finally tipping over the edge, not into the gears, but onto a narrow track. It snaked its way down, past miniature windmills that spun idly, and came to rest beside a lever. This course was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Or perhaps, a meticulous study in human nature, designed to dissect patience, test nerve, and expose the flimsy veneer of control we all pretend to possess. The ball, a small pearl of plastic, rested innocently beside the lever, its journey through whirring gears and spinning windmills now a distant memory. The lever itself was a simple affair, a tarnished brass handle set into a miniature control panel, its surface etched with symbols I did not recognize, looping, organic shapes that seemed almost alive. Sam, ever observant, leaned forward. "A gentle nudge," he murmured, just enough to engage it. Not too much, or you might send it tumbling into that crevice below. He pointed with a long finger to a narrow, dark gap that ran along the base of the control panel, a void that promised to swallow any errant shot. I surveyed the scene. The ball was perfectly positioned for a delicate tap. The challenge was not power, but precision. It was the kind of shot that demanded a feather touch, a breath held, a mind emptied of all but the immediate task. My putter, still feeling like an alien extension of my arm, descended slowly. I focused on the dimple of the ball, the slight sheen on the brass lever. The air in this strange, miniature world seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, amplifying the silence. The contact was barely audible, a soft click that resonated more in my bones than in the air. The ball rolled forward an inch, 2 inches, then nudged the lever. There was a satisfying mechanical thunk, a deeper, more resonant sound than I expected. The lever clicked into place, its brass handle now pointing downwards. For a moment, nothing happened. I held my breath, waiting. Then, with a low rumble that vibrated through the floor beneath my feet, a section of the wall behind the control panel began to slide open. It was not a grand, dramatic reveal, but a slow, deliberate parting of ancient-looking stone panels, revealing a new path. This was not a track for the ball, but a tunnel for us. The air that wafted from the newly opened passage was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of earth and something metallic, like old iron. Beyond the opening, a dim light pulsed, casting long, dancing shadows. Sam gestured towards it. "Our turn," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. We stepped through the opening. The tunnel was surprisingly narrow at first, forcing us to walk single file, Sam leading the way. The stone walls were rough, cool to the touch, and seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible energy. After a short, winding passage, the tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was breathtaking. Above us, the ceiling soared into an inky blackness, studded with what looked like distant stars, though I knew we were still underground, or at least within the confines of this impossible course. The floor of the cavern was a sprawling, intricate landscape, a miniature golf hole on a truly epic scale. The ball, having been deposited by some unseen mechanism, now rested on a small, elevated tee box carved from what appeared to be polished obsidian. Before it stretched a series of glowing pathways, crisscrossing a dark, reflective surface that mimicked a still lake. Floating on this lake were dozens of small, illuminated islands, each one a potential landing zone, each one seemingly connected by invisible currents that would guide the ball. The first challenge was to choose a path. The glowing lines on the water-like surface pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, sometimes fading, sometimes brightening, suggesting a dynamic, ever-changing route. Each line led to a different island, and each island seemed to have its own unique obstacle or feature. Sam pointed to a particularly bright, shimmering line that led to a larger island in the distance. That one, he said, has a clear run, but the island itself is a tricky slope. He then indicated a fainter, more circuitous route to a smaller island closer to us. This one is harder to hit, but the island is flat, a safer lie. I studied the options. The sheer scale of the hole was disorienting. It felt less like a game of golf, and more like navigating a celestial map. The air was still cool, but now carried a faint, sweet smell, like ozone after a summer storm. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the glowing pathways and the distant drip of water. I chose the harder, closer target. My instinct was to minimize risk, to take the shortest, most direct route, even if it meant a more precise shot. The larger island, with its promise of a clear run but a tricky slope, felt like a trap, a lure for the overconfident. I lined up the shot. The putter felt lighter now, a familiar friend rather than a heavy burden. I focused on the nearest glowing line, imagining the ball following its path. The dark, reflective surface seemed to absorb all sound, all light, save for the pulsating lines. It was a shot that required absolute commitment, no second-guessing. I swung. The ball flew true, a small white comet against the dark expanse. It landed with a soft splash on the reflective surface, not disturbing the calm, but immediately catching the nearest glowing line. The line brightened, pulsed, and the ball began to glide along it, as if pulled by an unseen current. It was mesmerizing to watch. The ball sailed across the dark expanse, a tiny vessel on a luminous river. It reached the small island, a perfectly circular patch of green felt, and came to a gentle stop near its center. "A good shot," Sam acknowledged, a hint of admiration in his voice. We had to cross the cavern to reach the island. This was where the course's ingenuity truly shone. As we approached the edge of the obsidian tee box, a section of the reflective surface began to solidify, rising slowly from the dark depths like a nascent land bridge. It was a translucent, crystalline path, humming with the same soft light as the glowing lines. We walked across it, the surface cool and firm beneath our feet, the illusion of walking on water almost complete. Below us, the dark depths seemed to swirl with faint, unseen currents. Reaching the island, I found the ball resting perfectly, a simple tap-in to the next stage. But what was the next stage? The island was small, barely big enough for us to stand on comfortably. In its center, nestled into the green felt, was not a hole, but a small, ornate pedestal. On the pedestal rested a miniature, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. Its eyes were tiny, polished gemstones that seemed to glow faintly. Sam frowned slightly. "This is new," he murmured. "I haven't seen this particular configuration before." He reached out a hand, hovering it over the bird, as if testing the air around it. I looked around the island. There were no other obvious paths, no other glowing lines. The bird was the only feature. Was it a puzzle? Was I supposed to interact with it? The course had presented mechanical challenges, precision challenges, even psychological challenges. Now, perhaps, a riddle. I remembered the gentle tap on the lever. This course seemed to reward subtlety, observation. I considered the bird. It looked delicate, ancient. What if I was supposed to hit it? That seemed too crude, too destructive. Perhaps, I mused, it's not about hitting it, but about making it fly. Sam nodded slowly. An interesting thought. But how? There were no visible mechanisms, no springs, no winding keys. I looked at my putter, then at the ball. The ball was still on the island, a few inches from the pedestal. What if the ball itself was the key? I decided, on a very light tap, just enough to roll the ball gently towards the pedestal, not to hit the bird, but to perhaps activate something in its base. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it felt right. The course had a logic, however arcane, and that logic often involved the ball interacting with its environment in unexpected ways. I took a deep breath, steadied my grip, and executed the softest tap I could manage. The ball rolled, almost imperceptibly, touching the base of the pedestal. A soft melodious chime echoed through the cavern, a sound like tiny crystal bells. The gemstone eyes of the wooden bird flared with a brighter light. Then, with a whirring of unseen mechanisms, its carved wings began to flap, slowly at first, then gaining speed. The bird lifted off the pedestal, rising into the air above us, circling the small island. As it flew, a faint, shimmering trail of light followed it, like stardust. The bird circled once, twice, then began to ascend towards the cavern ceiling, its light growing brighter, illuminating a section of the inky blackness above. As it reached its apex, a vast, circular section of the ceiling began to glow, revealing an intricate, celestial map etched into its surface. Constellations I recognized, and many I didn't, swirled in a slow, majestic dance. In the center of this cosmic display, a single, brilliant star pulsed with an intense white light. As the bird hovered beneath this star, A thin beam of light shot down from the star, striking the bird. The bird glowed intensely, then exploded, not in a destructive burst, but in a shower of golden motes of light that rained down upon the island. As these motes touched the green felt, they coalesced, forming a new feature. A miniature, swirling vortex of golden light appeared on the island, right where the bird had been. This vortex was clearly the next hole. The ball, having activated the bird, now rested beside it. The golden light pulsed gently, drawing the eye, beckoning the ball into its depths. Sam let out a low whistle. "Astounding," he murmured. "Truly astounding." He seemed as captivated as I was, his usual calm demeanor momentarily replaced by open wonder. I felt a surge of exhilaration. This course was not just a game, it was an experience, a journey into the fantastical. Each hole was a revelation, a new puzzle, a new layer of wonder. The sense of being tested, of being part of something grander, was intoxicating. I lined up the shot. This was a simple putt, a direct line into the golden vortex. The challenge here was not execution, but the sheer awe of the moment. I tapped the ball. It rolled smoothly, disappearing into the swirling light. As the ball vanished, the golden vortex shimmered, pulsed one last time, and then dissolved, leaving only the green felt of the island. The celestial map on the ceiling faded, the light in the cavern dimmed, and the crystalline bridge we had crossed retracted back into the dark waters. We were left, standing on the small island, a sense of quiet wonder hanging in the air. Then, with a gentle lurch, the entire island began to move. It glided silently across the dark, reflective surface, propelled by unseen forces, heading towards another, more distant part of the cavern. The journey was slow, a serene cruise through the vast, silent space. As we moved, I had a chance to truly take in the surroundings. The cavern was immense, far larger than any underground space I could imagine. It was filled with strange, organic formations that seemed to grow from the rock, twisting spires and shimmering crystalline structures that caught the dim, ambient light. Some sections glowed with a faint bioluminescence, casting soft, shifting hues of blue and green. The air grew heavier, warmer, now carrying a faint, earthy smell, mixed with something sweet and metallic, like old pennies and honey. The feeling of being watched, of being a participant in a grand unseen design, intensified. Sam stood beside me, his gaze sweeping across the cavern. He seemed to be cataloging every detail, every subtle shift in the environment. He murmured, "This place changes, always changes. It adapts. It learns." I looked at him. "Learns?" I asked, the word feeling strange on my tongue. He nodded, his eyes still distant. "It anticipates. It responds. Each player experiences a unique course, shaped by their choices, their strengths, their weaknesses." He paused, then looked at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You chose the path of precision, of subtle interaction. It responds to that." The idea that the course was a living, evolving entity was both thrilling and unsettling. It implied a consciousness, a purpose beyond mere entertainment. What was its purpose? What was it trying to teach me or test in me? The island eventually docked at a new section of the cavern, a much smaller, more intimate space, enclosed by towering crystalline pillars that pulsed with a soft, internal light. Here the air was warmer still, almost humid, and the scent of earth was stronger, mingling with something floral, like night-blooming jasmine. The ball was waiting for me, on a small patch of mossy ground. Before it lay a landscape of miniature, glowing flora. It was like putting through an alien garden. The path wound through bioluminescent mushrooms that pulsed with soft light, past tiny, shimmering flowers that unfurled their petals as we approached, and around miniature, crystal trees whose branches sparkled like diamonds. This hole was less about precision of power and more about navigating a labyrinth. The challenge was not to hit the ball hard, but to guide it gently through the delicate ecosystem, avoiding the plants that might snag it, or the subtle dips and rises in the mossy ground. Sam pointed to a cluster of particularly vibrant blue-glowing mushrooms. Avoid those, he advised. Their caps are surprisingly sticky, and mind the luminescence from the red flora. It can be disorienting. I found myself slowing down, taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of this miniature garden. It was exquisite, each plant meticulously crafted, each light source perfectly placed. It felt like walking through a dream. My first shot was cautious, a soft push that sent the ball meandering through a gap between two tall, purple-glowing ferns. It skirted a patch of shimmering, silver-leafed plants and came to rest near a tiny, crystal-clear stream that gurgled softly, its water flowing with an impossibly gentle current. The stream was the next obstacle. It was too wide for the ball to simply roll over. On its banks, tiny, translucent stepping stones glowed faintly, leading across the water. But these stones were not fixed. They pulsed with light, appearing and disappearing in a rhythmic pattern, like a complex code. This was a timing challenge. I had to hit the ball onto a stepping stone as it appeared, then hope it would bounce or roll onto the next one before the first one vanished. It was a sequence, a dance of light and shadow, and the ball had to follow the rhythm. Sam watched intently. The sequence is subtle, he observed. Look for the pattern in the fade, not just the appearance. The light dims before it disappears entirely. I focused. The stream gurgled. The stones pulsed. I watched the pattern for several cycles, trying to internalize the rhythm, to predict the precise moment of appearance and disappearance. It was like trying to catch fireflies in the dark. Finally, I felt ready. I chose the moment, a brief window when two stones aligned perfectly, one appearing just as the ball would reach it, the next appearing just as it would leave the first. I tapped the ball. It rolled, light as a feather, hitting the first stone just as it solidified. For a split second, it hovered there, then bounced gently onto the second stone, which was now fully illuminated. The first stone winked out of existence behind it. The ball continued its journey, hopping from stone to stone, a perfect, ethereal leap across the gurgling stream. It landed safely on the other side, on a patch of soft green moss, just a few feet from the hole. The hole itself was nestled within a large, luminous flower, its petals unfurled, revealing a dark, inviting center. I felt a thrill of victory. This was more than just getting the ball in a hole. It was a successful interaction with a living, breathing puzzle. It was a moment of perfect synchronicity between my intent and the course's design. The putt was simple, a straight shot into the glowing flower. The ball rolled in, and the petals of the flowers slowly closed, engulfing it in a soft, warm light. Another hole completed. As the flower closed, the surrounding crystalline pillars began to shift, their internal lights fading and brightening in a new, complex pattern. The air grew cooler again, and the floral scent dissipated, replaced by the faint tang of salt and ozone. The floor beneath us began to vibrate, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. Then, slowly, majestically, the entire section of the cavern floor we were on began to rise. It was like being on a massive elevator, lifting us higher and higher into the cavern's immense space. The ascent was gradual, but relentless. As we rose, the vastness of the ascent was gradual, but relentless. As we rose, the vastness of the cavern began to unfurl itself above us, a breathtaking spectacle that dwarfed anything I had previously imagined. The initial ceiling, which I had presumed to be the top, receded into an impossibly distant haze, revealing layer upon layer of crystalline formations, glowing veins of light, and intricate structures clinging to the cavern walls like colossal, bioluminescent barnacles. The air grew clearer, crisper, and the subtle tang of salt and ozone intensified, hinting at an even larger body of water far, far above, or perhaps an atmospheric condition I could not comprehend. The light, which had been a soft ambient glow, now seemed to emanate from countless sources scattered throughout the immense space. Some were the familiar pulsing flowers, now appearing as mere specks of color in the distance, while others were massive, slow-burning orbs of light, suspended by unseen forces, casting long, ethereal shadows. Chloe, usually so composed, was visibly frustrated. She took a deep breath, walked up to her ball, which had also found a soft spot on the bounce house, and without a word, she just hit it as hard as she possibly could. It was less a golf shot and more an act of pure defiance. The ball shot up, spun wildly, and ricocheted off one of the inflatable turrets of the bounce house, sailing backwards and landing with a pathetic plop right next to her feet. Mark pointed at her ball, still on the bounce house, and just mouthed, "Still lying as it lies." Chloe let out a frustrated scream that echoed across the usually serene course. Sam, ever the innovator, had an idea. He pulled out his putter. We all stared at him. "You can't be serious, Sam. You're going to put it off a bounce house?" He just grinned. "Worth a shot, right?" He carefully lined up, took a gentle stroke, and the ball, instead of rolling, just kind of bounced and bobbled, picking up speed as it navigated the undulating terrain of the inflatable structure. It actually made it to the edge, teetered for a moment, and then fell off, landing with a soft thud in the rough just beyond the bounce house. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't elegant, but it was off the bounce house. Sam pumped his fist in triumph. "That's how you do it, boys and girls," he yelled, completely ignoring the fact that it took him 3 strokes to get there. Eventually, after an embarrassingly high number of strokes for all of us, we managed to get our balls off the bounce house. The rest of the hole was a blur of frustration and laughter. Liam finally made it to the green in about 8 strokes. Chloe, still fuming, chipped in from the fringe for a miraculous triple bogey. Sam, after his putter stunt, managed a double bogey. I ended up with a quadruple bogey. The first hole, a par 4, had just taken us a solid half an hour. This was not going to be a quick round. As we trudged towards the second tee box, Mark and Dave were already there, setting up their next masterpiece of mischief. The second hole, a relatively short par 3, usually involved a precise iron shot over a small pond to a well-guarded green. Today, however, the pond was gone. Or, rather, it was covered. Covered by what looked like a giant inflatable slip and slide. Not just any slip and slide, mind you, but one covered in what appeared to be dish soap and actual bubbles. And to make matters worse, the tee box itself was now a wobbly, unstable platform made of old wooden pallets. Liam took one look and just started shaking his head. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane." Chloe, surprisingly, seemed to have found a new resolve, a grim determination. She just stared at the slip and slide, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. Sam, on the other hand, was already eyeing the bubbles. "I bet I can make it splash," he said, completely missing the point. Mark, ever the showman, held up a small waterproof speaker. He pressed a button, and suddenly the theme music from a classic arcade game started blaring across the course. He just pointed at the slip and slide. "Good luck, folks. Try not to get too wet." The wobbly tee box was a challenge in itself. It swayed and creaked under our weight, making a stable stance almost impossible. Liam, trying to compensate for the instability, overswung his iron, sending his ball flying high and wide, completely missing the slip and slide and landing deep in the woods to the left. He let out a primal scream of frustration. My turn again. I decided to try and hit a low, piercing shot, hoping to skim it across the slippery surface. I swung, connected well, and the ball took off, a tiny white projectile. It hit the slip and slide with a slight bounce, then skittered across the soapy surface, gaining speed as it went. For a glorious moment, it looked like it might actually make it to the green. But then, just as it reached the far edge, it hit a particularly large bubble, popped it, and then, almost in slow motion, veered sharply left, rolling off the slip and slide and into another, even deeper, patch of rough. I could hear Mark and Dave stifling their laughter. Chloe, with her newfound steely resolve, approached the wobbly tee. She took a moment, adjusted her grip, and then, with an almost balletic movement, she swung. It was a perfect shot, a beautiful arc, flying directly over the slip and slide. It landed softly on the green, rolling gently towards the flag. We erupted in cheers. Chloe, a triumphant smirk on her face, bowed theatrically. "Take that, Greenkeepers!" she yelled. Mark and Dave just stared, momentarily stunned. They hadn't accounted for Chloe's sudden surge of focus. Sam was next. He ignored the wobbly platform entirely. He just ran up, took a quick, almost baseball-like swing, and topped the ball. It dribbled off the tee box, rolled onto the slip and slide, and then, instead of skimming across, it just sank into the soapy foam, getting completely bogged down. He tried to retrieve it, but the surface was too slick. He ended up slipping, doing a full split and landing with a giant splash in the bubbles. He emerged, soaked and sputtering, but still laughing. "Totally worth it," he declared, wiping foam from his eyes. We were all laughing so hard we could barely stand. After much struggling and another high stroke count, we finally made it to the green. Chloe, with her amazing shot, managed a par. The rest of us, well, let's just say our scores were less than stellar. Sam, still dripping wet, was trying to wring out his shirt. Liam was still muttering about the unfairness of it all. I was just marveling at the sheer ingenuity of Mark and Dave. They really had outdone themselves. As we got into our golf carts, heading towards the third hole, a sense of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of dread, settled over us. What could possibly be next? A giant fan blowing our balls off course? A mini golf loop-de-loop on the green? The possibilities were endless and terrifying. The third hole was a long par 5, usually a chance to really open up with the driver. As we approached the tee, we noticed a distinct lack of fairway. Instead, stretching out before us was a vast, sprawling network of tunnels. Not golf tunnels, mind you. These looked like something out of a hamster habitat, but human-sized. Brightly colored, translucent plastic tubes, winding and twisting, some going uphill, some downhill, with little openings at various points. And, of course, a sign prominently displayed, "The Hamster Run. Play it as it lies." My eyes widened. This was next level. Liam just threw his hands up. "I'm done. I'm absolutely done." Chloe, however, was intrigued. "This is actually kind of cool," she admitted. Sam, ever the adventurer, was already trying to figure out which entrance to use. Mark and Dave, predictably, were lounging nearby, sipping lemonade, enjoying our collective bewilderment. Mark just pointed to the first opening of the tunnel system. "Your objective, should you choose to accept it, is to get your ball through the hamster run and onto the green. Oh, and no touching the ball once it's in the tunnels. You have to use your club to guide it." This was going to be a nightmare. We each teed off, trying to hit our balls into one of the tunnel entrances. Liam, still frustrated from the previous holes, sliced his ball way right, missing the tunnels entirely and landing in a flower bed. He let out another mournful cry. Chloe, with careful precision, managed to hit hers perfectly into the central tunnel opening. We watched it disappear into the plastic maze. My turn. I aimed for a wider opening, trying to get a straight shot into the system. My ball bounced off the edge, but thankfully it rolled into a side tunnel. Now came the tricky part. We had to follow our balls into the tunnels. Crawling. Yes, crawling. These tunnels were just barely big enough for us to squeeze into, on our hands and knees. It was claustrophobic, dusty, and surprisingly warm inside. Chloe, being smaller, navigated her tunnel with relative ease, her golf club extended in front of her, gently nudging her ball along. We could hear her excited shouts as her ball made progress. Sam, however, was having a tougher time. He was a bit broader in the shoulders, and he kept getting stuck. His muffled grunts and curses echoed through the plastic tubes. We could hear his ball clanking against the sides of the tunnel as he tried to push it with his club, often sending it rolling backward, forcing him to backtrack. He eventually got so frustrated that he started just pushing the ball with his nose, which was both hilarious and incredibly inefficient. I, too, found myself struggling. My ball, after a few gentle nudges, decided to take a sharp turn into a section that went steeply uphill. I had to push it with my club, inch by agonizing inch, my back aching, my knees protesting. The air grew stale, and I could feel sweat trickling down my face. This wasn't golf. This was a bizarre, full-body workout designed by sadists. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, Chloe's ball finally popped out of an exit tunnel, landing softly on the fringe of the green. She emerged moments later, covered in dust, but beaming. "Yes," she yelled, wiping her brow. "This is actually fun." She was clearly enjoying the sheer absurdity of it all. Sam's ball eventually popped out, but it had taken him so long, and so many strokes within the tunnel system, that he was already looking at a high score for the hole. He emerged red-faced and disheveled, muttering something about needing a shower and a chiropractor. My ball finally saw the light of day, landing just off the green, after what felt like a truly epic journey through the plastic maze. I crawled out, gasping for air, my clothes covered in dust and a few cobwebs. Liam, who had taken a penalty for his flower bed shot, had eventually just picked up his ball and dropped it near the green, conceding the hole. He was now sitting on a bench, looking utterly defeated, occasionally muttering about the Geneva Convention. The putting on this hole was a relief, a return to some semblance of normalcy, even if our scores were completely blown out of proportion. Chloe, with her tunnel mastery, managed a bogey. I ended up with a triple bogey, mostly due to the sheer number of times my ball got stuck in the hamster run. Sam, despite his struggles, still had a smile on his face. "This is the most ridiculous golf I've ever played," he said, "and I kinda love it." As we walked towards the fourth tee, the sun was still high, but our energy levels were definitely waning. We were exhausted, frustrated, and completely covered in various golf course detritus, from bounce house residue to tunnel dust. But there was also an undeniable sense of camaraderie and shared experience. This wasn't just a golf game anymore. This was an epic adventure, a battle of wits against two very determined greenkeepers. The fourth hole was a relatively short par 4, usually a good chance for a birdie. But as we approached, we saw it. The entire fairway was covered in a thick, dense layer of foam. Not just a little foam like from a bubble machine, but industrial strength, fire extinguisher level foam, piled several feet high. It looked like a giant, fluffy white cloud. A pristine, almost inviting landscape that belied its true nature. My jaw dropped. Sam let out a low whistle. "Seriously," he said. "Foam? What are we supposed to do with foam?" I had no idea. It stretched from just beyond the tee box all the way to the green, a sea of white peaks and valleys. There were no visible markers, no flags, just foam. And somewhere beneath it, a fairway and a hole. "This is it," I declared, with a dramatic sweep of my hand. "The ultimate challenge. We must conquer the foam." Sam just shook his head, a wide grin spreading across his face. "You know, I actually prefer this to regular golf right now. At least it's never boring." We debated strategy. Hit high and hope to land on top? Hit low and risk sinking? Walk through it first to gauge its depth? The last option seemed the most sensible, if also the most ridiculous. We ventured onto the course, each step sinking us into the surprisingly resilient, yet yielding, white mass. It was like walking on a giant marshmallow, if marshmallows were slightly sticky and smelled faintly of something vaguely chemical. The foam came up to our knees, sometimes higher, making every step an effort. It clung to our shoes, our trousers. We were giggling like children, pushing through the bizarre landscape. We found the approximate location of the green by spotting the faint outline of the flagstick poking through a particularly tall peak of foam. "Right," I said, wiping a dollop of foam from my nose. "This is going to be interesting." Our first attempts were predictably disastrous. My drive, a hopeful arc meant to clear the worst of it, landed with a soft plop and vanished instantly. Gone. Sam's attempt, a more cautious low punch, burrowed its way into the foam like a mole. We spent the next 10 minutes trying to locate our balls, wading through the sudsy expanse, feeling with our feet, plunging our hands in. It was like a treasure hunt in a giant bubble bath. Eventually, we gave up on the first 2 balls. We took mulligans, agreeing that the foam was an unplayable lie. The only way to get any distance was to hit with immense power and hope the ball skipped across the surface, or to get incredibly lucky. It was a game of pure chance. My 3rd ball, struck with a desperate fury, bounced twice, disappeared, then miraculously reappeared a few feet further, a white sphere briefly visible against the white foam before sinking again. Sam, with a mischievous glint in his eye, decided on a different approach. He took out his sand wedge, adopted a stance like he was about to hit out of the deepest bunker imaginable, and swung with all his might. A colossal spray of foam erupted, and his ball, propelled by the sheer force, actually flew a good 50 yards before landing with a splash and a gurgle. "That's it," he yelled. Triumphant. You have to treat it like a hazard. A really, really big, fluffy hazard. We spent the rest of the hole perfecting our foam shots, each one a spectacle of flying suds and desperate hope. We were covered head to toe in the stuff, our hair matted, our clothes soaked, our clubs slick. The ball rarely went where we intended, often veering wildly as it hit an unseen pocket of air or a denser patch of foam. Putting on the foam-covered green was an exercise in futility. We just had to get it near times the flagstick, then dig around until we found the hole. Our scores were astronomical, but our spirits, oddly, remained high. The sheer absurdity of it all was infectious. We were laughing so hard our sides ached. We finally completed the 4th hole, emerging from the foam pit looking like 2 snowmen who had been in a particularly violent snowball fight. Our golf bags were dripping, our shoes squelched with every step. But we had done it. We had defeated the foam. Or, at least, we had survived it. As we trudged towards the 5th tee, the sun, which had been so bright and innocent at the start of our round, now seemed to mock us. The air was still warm, but a peculiar chill had settled into our bones, a combination of dampness and exhaustion. What fresh hell awaits us now? Sam wondered aloud, wiping foam from his glasses. We rounded a bend in the cart path, and there it was, the 5th hole. And it was unlike anything we could have imagined. The fairway was perfectly normal, a pristine stretch of green grass. But the green itself was a masterpiece of horticultural engineering. It was a giant, 3-dimensional maze, constructed entirely out of carefully manicured hedges, about 6 feet high. The flagstick was visible only as a distant tiny speck, deep within the labyrinth. "Oh, come on," I groaned. "A hedge maze? For putting?" Sam, however, seemed to have found a new wellspring of energy. "This is brilliant," he declared, rubbing his hands together. "A proper challenge. Mind games." We managed to get our drives onto the edge of the green, which was itself a feat given our current state. But then the real fun began. We had to navigate the maze on foot, pushing our balls along with our putters, trying to find the path to the hole. It was infuriating. We'd think we had found the way, only to be met by a dead end. We tried to chip over a low hedge, only for the ball to get stuck in the leaves. We'd lose sight of each other for minutes at a time, only to shout across the hedges, giving increasingly desperate updates on our progress. "I think I see it," Sam would yell, his voice echoing eerily. "No, wait, that's just a particularly bright patch of moss." At one point I thought I heard a rustling in the hedges, and a fleeting glimpse of something dark and green disappearing around a corner. I paused, my putter mid-swing. "Did you see that?" I asked Sam, who was currently trying to bounce his ball off a hedge wall in a desperate attempt to gain an advantage. "See what?" he replied, entirely focused on his ball. "My ball is stuck. Again." I shook my head. Probably just my imagination. The greenkeepers were clearly playing with our minds. The maze took us an eternity. Every putt was a mini-adventure, every corner a new puzzle. We were pushing double digits on this hole before we even got within 10 feet of the pin. When we finally, mercifully, sank our balls, we emerged from the maze looking disheveled and slightly disoriented, like 2 explorers who had just returned from a perilous jungle expedition. The 6th hole promised a brief respite, a simple par 3 over a small pond, a chance to regain some semblance of our golfing dignity. Or so we thought. As we approached the tee box, we heard it. A cacophony of quacking. The pond was not just a pond. It was a giant, shimmering expanse of water, absolutely teeming with rubber ducks. Thousands of them, bright yellow, bobbing, jostling for space. I blinked. Sam blinked. Rubber ducks, he stated, deadpan. Of course. Why not? This was a new level of surreal. The ducks were everywhere, making a solid carpet across the water. There was no way to hit a ball without hitting at least a dozen of them. Do you think they're anchored? I wondered aloud. Or do they just float freely? My drive, struck with a renewed sense of weary resignation, soared through the air and landed with a soft thud right in the middle of the duck pond. Instantly, a small explosion of yellow ducks scattered, then slowly, inexorably began to converge on my ball, nudging it, pushing it, until it was completely obscured from view. Sam's shot, a beautiful iron, landed perfectly amongst the ducks. For a moment, it seemed to be floating on their backs, a tiny white island in a sea of yellow. Then, with a gentle ripple, it slowly sank, pulled down by the sheer weight of the surrounding bath toys. "This is impossible," I laughed, a hysterical edge to my voice. "We can't get our balls out of there." But then, a small, remote-controlled boat, shaped like a miniature pirate ship, puttered out from the far bank. On its deck, a tiny claw mechanism extended, expertly scooped up Sam's ball and delivered it to the edge of the green. "Well, I'll be darned," Sam said, genuinely impressed. They even thought of that. We had to hit our balls into the duck pond, wait for the pirate ship to retrieve them, then chip onto the green. It was a slow, agonizing process, made even more frustrating by the fact that the ducks sometimes jostled the balls into unretrievable positions, requiring a penalty drop. We spent a good half-hour playing against the ducks and the miniature pirate fleet, our scores climbing ever higher. The rhythmic quacking of the thousands of plastic birds was beginning to grate on my nerves. By the time we reached the seventh tee, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the course. We were exhausted, our clothes still damp from the foam, our minds addled by mazes and ducks. Our golf bags felt heavier with each step, laden with the detritus of our ridiculous round. The seventh hole was a short par 3, and as we walked onto the tee box, we saw the problem. The entire green and a good 20 yards around it was covered in trampolines. Not just one or two, but a sprawling, interconnected network of trampolines, forming a giant, undulating, bouncy green. The flagstick was in the middle, looking like a lone lighthouse in a sea of springy fabric. Sam just stared. He didn't even laugh this time, he just stared. "I think I'm hallucinating," he said quietly. I pinched myself. Nope. Still here, still golf, still insane. How do you even put on that, I wondered. Do you have to bounce your ball into the hole? Our first attempts were, again, pure comedy. My ball landed on a trampoline with a gentle thud, then immediately sprang 10 feet into the air, caught a gust of wind, and bounced off into the rough. Sam's shot, a low punch, landed, and then just skittered wildly, picking up speed as it bounced from one trampoline to another, eventually disappearing over the edge of the green entirely. We quickly realized that putting was out of the question. The only way to get the ball near the hole was to try and land it directly in the cup, or at least very close, hoping it would settle before bouncing away. It was a game of precision and luck, requiring a delicate touch that neither of us possessed at this point in the day. We experimented. We tried hitting with minimal force, hoping the ball would just roll. It didn't. It bounced. We tried hitting with more force, hoping to overwhelm the bounce. It just bounced higher and further. We even tried dropping the ball from a height, like a bizarre physics experiment. The trampolines were relentless. Eventually, Sam had an idea. He took out his sand wedge again, and instead of hitting the ball, he hit the trampoline next to the ball, using the spring action to propel it towards the hole. It was a wild, unpredictable shot, but it actually worked, sending the ball on a surprisingly accurate trajectory towards the pin. It landed with a soft thud, bounced once, and then, miraculously, settled just a few feet from the cup. "You're a genius," I declared, utterly amazed. He just shrugged, a tired smile on his face. Desperate times, my friend. Desperate times. We finished the trampoline hole. Our score is once again in the stratosphere. But